Hi guys, hope you had a good weekend. We are back to finish the last few chapters of Bunnicula and find out what happens. So, chapter 8, Disaster in the Dining Room. I realized there was nothing I could do for Bunnicula during the day since he was sleeping, but that gave me time to plan my strategy. Hi everyone, hope you guys had a good weekend. We are back to finish the last couple chapters of Bunnicula. If you guys remember, Chester was trying to starve poor Bunnicula to death, which we definitely do not do around here, and Harold is going to try to help. So, chapter 8, Disaster in the Dining Room. I realized there was nothing I could do for Bunnicula during the day since he was sleeping, but that gave me time to plan my strategy. At first, I thought I could bring food to his cage, but then it occurred to me that Chester must be taking everything away that was given to him. Pete and Toby usually left lettuce for Bunnicula during the day while he was sleeping, and Chester, ever watchful, probably nabbed it each evening just before the rabbit woke. No, there would have to be another way. I thought and thought all afternoon, and I could see that Chester had done a good job of isolating Bunnicula from his food. There was no way I could think of to overcome Chester's game plan. As evening drew closer, I grew more and more frantic. I stumbled into the dining room and saw the answer to my problem sitting before me on the table. It was a big bowl of salad. All I had to do was get Bunnicula to the salad and let him get his fill before the family came in to eat. With that funny white dressing on it, would they ever notice if a few vegetables were white? I ran into the hallway to check the clock. 6:15. It would be 15 minutes before the sun went down and Bunnicula woke up. I would need then at least 5 minutes to get him from his cage to the table and feed him. All I had to do was make sure no one came into the room until he had finished. I needed a good 20 minutes at least. I went back into the dining room. Chester was asleep on his brown velvet chair, shedding in his sleep, still worn out from the previous night's activities. I checked upstairs. Toby was reading in his room. The last chapter of Treasure Island, I noted. Pete, who should have been doing his homework, was listening to records in his room. I ran down to the kitchen. "Hello, Harold," Mrs. Monroe said as I came through the door. "What's new?" "Other than a rabbit starving in the next room and an imminent attack on your salad bowl, nothing," I thought. I stood at her feet and panted. She scratched my head. This gave me a moment to check out how far she was in her cooking. "Sorry, Harold, I have to baste this chicken." I noticed the oven timer still had 35 minutes left to go. It'll be tight, I thought, but I can make it. Now, where is Mr. Monroe? I went to the front door and whimpered loudly. Mrs. Monroe followed me. "Are you waiting for Daddy, Harold? He'll be home soon." Soon isn't good enough. How soon? I whimpered again. "Patience, boy. He's late at the school meeting. He should be here any time." She went back into the kitchen and I checked the clock. 6:25. It was getting dark and Chester was still asleep. Time to swing into action. Having watched Chester undo the lock of Bunnicula's cage and having participated in this unfortunate steak episode some days earlier, I knew I would have no problem getting Bunnicula out. I just had to be a little more careful where I positioned my head so I wouldn't find myself in the humiliating predicament of getting stuck a second time. My timing was perfect. With Bunnicula swinging peacefully from my teeth, I made my way stealthily towards the dining room. The last rays of sunlight gave way to the dark of night. Once inside the dining room door, Bunnicula awakened in great bewilderment. It's not every day, after all, that one finds itself, upon wakening, hanging from the jaws of a fellow creature, even so caring and gentle a creature as myself. Bunnicula opened his eyes wide and turned his face, as best he could, to me. I jumped up on the nearest chair and placed the rabbit safely on the table's edge. "Okay," I whispered. "There's your dinner. Go to it. Get your fill as fast as you can, poor bunny. I'll stand guard." I don't know that Bunnicula fully understood what was going on, but the sight of the vegetables piled high in the center of the table sent him scurrying in their direction. He was very hungry. As luck would have it, and as I should have anticipated, Chester's sense of timing was as astute as my own. No sooner had Bunnicula reached the edge of the salad bowl Then the door swung open and Chester bounded into the room. He surveyed the scene frantically. I was unable to act fast enough. Upon seeing Bunnicula about to enjoy his first bit of nourishment in days, Chester leaped across the table, seemingly without touching the floor, chairs, or anything else between himself and our furry friend, and landed directly on top of the bunny. "Oh, no, you don't," he shrieked. Bunnicula, not sure what to do, jumped high in the air and landed, with a great scattering of greens smack in the center of the salad bowl. Lettuce and tomatoes and carrots and cucumbers went flying all over the table and onto the floor. Chester flattened his ears, wiggled his rear end, and smiled in anticipation. I'll show you guys a picture. You guys can see poor little Bunnicula right there. Chester not letting him have his food. To cat observers, this is known as attack position. "Run, Bunnicula!" I shouted. Bunnicula turned in my direction, as if to ask where. "Anywhere," I cried. "Just get out of his way." Chester sprang. Bunnicula jumped, and in a flash of a second they had changed positions. Chester now found himself flat on his back, owing to the slipperiness of the salad dressing in the bowl. And Bunnicula, too dazed to even think about food now, hovered quivering on the table. Chester was having a great deal of difficulty getting back on his feet, but I knew it was only a matter of seconds before he'd attack again. And I also knew that Bunnicula was too petrified to do anything to save himself. So I did the only thing I could. I barked, very loudly and very rapidly. The whole family rushed to the doors. Mr. Monroe must have come home because his coat was still on. "Oh no," cried Mrs. Monroe. "That's it, Chester. This is Chester's last stand." Chester rolled his eyes heavenward and didn't even try to move. "Mom," Toby said, tugging his mom's arm, "look at Bunnicula. How did he get out of his cage? He looks scared." "Of course he's scared," Mrs. Monroe said. "We probably forgot to latch his cage and he got out. And I think Chester has been chasing him." Toby put his face close to the rabbit. "Mom, doesn't Bunnicula look kind of sick?" "We better take him to the vet and see if there's any damage done," she answered. I started to whimper. No need for me to go to the vet. Mr. Monroe patted my head. "We may as well take Harold along," he said. "He's probably due for his shots." Mrs. Monroe carefully picked Chester out of the salad bowl and carried him by the scruff of his neck into the kitchen. "I'm going to give Chester a quick bath," she said to Mr. Monroe. "Why don't you put a fresh salad together? Toby, you and Peter put Bunnicula back in his cage and then clean up the table." I didn't stick around for an assignment. This is not the time to be in the way. And besides, I now had the whole evening and night ruined. I had now a whole evening and night ruined to worry about the next morning's visit to the vet. This little effort of mine, I thought, has been a disaster in more ways than one. Chapter 9. All's well that ends well. Almost. Looking back on that night, I remember thinking that this whole mess could never be resolved happily. What would become of Bunnicula, my new friend, who was suffering from starvation? And what of Chester, my old friend, who seemed to have flipped his lid and, if you'll pardon the expression, was in the doghouse with the Monroes? Of far greater concern at that time, of course, was my own future. For on that night, all that consumed my thoughts was the fear of the next day's injections. It seemed hopeless indeed. But looking back on that next day, I can tell you that happy endings are possible, even in situations as fraught with complications as this one. Early the next morning, we all piled into the car, some of us with greater reluctance than others, and tumbled off to the vet. And by the afternoon, we were on our way to solving our problems. The vet worked everything out nicely. He discovered that Bunnicula was suffering from extreme hunger. I could have told him that. Rather than jar with his fragile stomach with solid foods, the doctor decided to put him on a liquid diet until he got better. So Bunnicula was immediately given some carrot juice, which he drank eagerly. After he finished, he looked over at me with a great grin on his face and winked. Chester was diagnosed as being emotionally overwrought. It was suggested that he start sessions with a cat psychiatrist to work out what the doctor called a case of sibling rivalry with Bunnicula. I asked Chester later what sibling was, but he wasn't speaking to me, so I had to look it up. It's like a brother or a sister. And sibling rivalry means that you're competing with your brother or sister for attention. I wasn't sure this was Chester's problem, but it sure explained a lot about Toby and Pete. As for me, well, I came out the best. Dr. Wesserman was all set to give me my shots when the nurse came in with my card. Wait, doctor, this dog doesn't need his shots yet. It's too soon. So I got a pat on the head and a doggy pop instead. These days, everything is back to normal in the Monroe household. Almost. Bunnicula liked his liquid diet so much that the Monroes have kept him on it. And oddly enough, there's been no problems with vegetables mysteriously turning white since. Of course, Chester insists that this proves his theory. Obviously, Harold, the liquefied vegetables take the place of the vegetable juices, so Bunnicula doesn't need to go roaming anymore. Then he's not a vampire, I said. Nonsense. He's a vampire, all right, but he's a modern vampire. He gets his juices from a blender. Case closed, Sherlock? I queried. Case closed. Oh, Chester. Yeah, Harold? What are those two funny marks on your neck? Chester jumped and I laughed. Very funny, he said, as he began to bathe his tail again. Very funny. The Monroes never knew anything of Chester's theory. They changed markets, and to this day they believe they were victims of a curious vegetable blight. Bunnicula and I have become good friends. He still doesn't say anything, but he snuggles up next to me by the fireplace, and we take long, cozy snoozes together. One night I sang him a lullaby in the obscure dialect of his homeland, and he slept very peacefully. It was that night that cemented our friendship. Now, about Chester. I said that everything was back to normal. Almost. Naturally, Chester is the almost. He had been seeing his psychiatrist twice a week for some time now, and he takes his therapy very seriously. The other morning I was trying to get a little sleep when Chester came over and nudged me in the ribs. Harold, do you realize we've never really communicated? I mean really communicated? I opened one eye cautiously. And in order to communicate, Harold, you have to really be in touch with yourself. Are you in touch with yourself, Harold? Can you look in the mirror and say, I know who I am. I am in touch with the me-ness that is me. And I can reach out to the you-ness that is you. I closed my eye. I'm used to it by now. He talks like this all the time. He no longer reads Edgar Allan Poe at night. And once he concluded that he had been right about Bunnicula, there was no more talk about vampires. The mark of the vampire sits in its usefulness obsolete on its shelf. Right now he's reading Finding Yourself by Screaming a Lot. And the other night when I heard the most awful noise coming from the basement, I didn't even bat an eyelid. I knew it was Chester just finding himself, as he calls it. He explains to me that he is getting in touch with his kittenhood. And I've told him that's fine, just to let me know when he's going to do it so I can be elsewhere. I have had enough trouble from Chester's adventures. So, that's my story. The story of a mysterious stranger who no longer seems quite so mysterious and who is definitely no longer a stranger. I've presented the facts as clearly as I could, and I leave it to you, dear reader, to draw your own conclusions. I must now bring this narrative to a close since it is Friday night, Toby's night to stay up late and read, and I can hear the crinkling of cellophane. I can only hope it covers 2 chocolate cupcakes with cream filling. Okay, all done. So what do you guys think? Do you think Bunnicula was a real vampire? I don't know. Okay, we'll be back tomorrow with a different book. Bye, guys.